He asked to see his dog one final time before the fatal injection. But the antechamber, everyone in the room fell silent as the animal's reaction filled the steel hallways of Dr. Olivia, looked to be burdened by the stifling quiet that reverberated throughout Blackwood State Penitentiary in Texas. The footsteps of the experienced prison psychologist echoed off Carter's shoulders as she moved through the building, the chilly floor, each stride taking her one step closer to the case that would prove to be the most difficult of her career. James Knight Callahan, a former mechanic, was unfairly convicted due to shaky testimony and circumstantial evidence, had made a last strange request that moved even the most stern inmates. He wanted to meet his elderly boss. Originally, there had been opposition to the desire to give Golden Retriever Bailey one final visit before his planned treatment from the administration of the institution, but Dr. Carter's fervent support, along with negotiations that took place behind the scenes, ultimately resulted in its acceptance, while she waited in the visitation room. Something about this case had never felt right, and Olivia couldn't get rid of the feeling. The hurried trial, the confused scholar, her professional instincts was nagged by the whispered misgivings and circumstantial evidence when the door opened, and Bailey came in with a handler. The typically kind and amiable dog's response startled everyone in the room as Bailey's attitude abruptly altered when he saw Margaret Has, a seasoned guard renowned for her rigorous discipline. As he walked a few paces, the Golden Retriever's fur furrowed drastically, and a deep growl came out of his throat. Margaret's response, before he was restrained by his leash, was just as telling as the normally calm guard's. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but her face was pale, her hands were shaking a little, and she looked away. The tension in the room was evident, and Olivia felt as though it went on forever. James watched from his chair as his trained psychologist's mind started to piece together an uncomfortable conundrum. A resigned look, but Olivia noticed a faint request in his eyes that he was the only one who appeared to notice when the session was cut short to make room for Bailey, whom she knew she couldn't ignore. Olivia, no longer following her intuition, started looking through previous case files and discovered disturbing, partially censored statements and, most intriguingly, a surveillance recording from her missing report pages. On the day of the incident, which was documented in the documents but was never mentioned in the court case, her informal speaking with a long-standing worker uncovered another odd detail. Former policeman Bobby Harris, who was part in the first investigation, had been going to the prison on a regular basis in recent months, even though they were no longer officially involved in the investigation. That night, Olivia was getting ready to leave her workplace. An anonymous email with a single grainy file showed up in her inbox. The picture of Bobby, close to the location on the night of the event, made her mind race with potential outcomes. With inquiries that required responses, Bailey's ongoing presence in the facility was having unanticipated consequences. He escaped from the approved visitation area during a subsequent visit, and Olivia eventually located him close to the warden's office. He was holding a tiny piece of cloth between his teeth, but it didn't match any of the evidence from the initial inquiry, so he added, Margaret's behavior became more unpredictable and her reactions to routines added another level of intrigue to the developing mystery. She became evasive while answering inquiries and changed shifts a lot, seemingly in an attempt to dodge someone or something. As Olivia stared, the self-assured guard leapt at shadows, her poise breaking under an unseen force. After yet another stressful interaction, Margaret hurried along the hallway because she couldn't get rid of the sensation that she was standing on the border. The truth was there, concealed in plain sight, on the brink of something far larger than she had first thought. Sight waiting to be discovered, but she was unaware that the stakes were too high and time was running out. An inquiry would reveal a network of dishonesty that would rock the foundations of the legal system itself, and that Bailey's peculiar actions would turn out to be the secret that had been kept hidden for too long. At Blackwood State Penitentiary, Dr. Olivia Carter discovered, after examining the security footage, she was able to obtain the fractured photos at last. In the jail hallways, Margaret Hayes got into a furious disagreement with someone as the other remained unrecognizable. Olivia's trained eye noticed that Margaret was holding a plastic bag that was just like the one that was utilized to hide evidence. In James's case, the revelation chilled her. But as she continuously rewinded the video in an attempt to get any more details, her office phone rang. The voice on the other end was digitally changed, shattering the quiet of the early morning. Yet the message, "Olivia, it's obvious that you're interfering with something more significant than you think. Stop now or else people will suffer." When she put the phone back in its cradle, her hands shook, but her determination only made her years of experience as a hospital visitor. She had learned to trust her instincts from the jail psychologist, and now she felt every ounce of her being screaming that James. Although Callahan was innocent, her worries grew after learning that Bailey had become unwell during his, according to the veterinarian's most recent visit. There were residues of rat poison in his system that had been given recently when someone was frantically attempting to silence Bailey while the dog was inside the prison walls. However, what could a dog possibly understand that was worth taking such drastic measures? When Olivia found a crumpled note in the prison's neglected records department, the answers started to take shape. "I was there that night when he didn't do it," it said in unsteady handwriting. Although the note wasn't signed, Olivia couldn't help but notice the handwriting, because she had seen it on countless Margaret Hayes submitted guard reports as Olivia investigated the prison's property. She found further unsettling similarities between Robert Bobby Harris's name and Camilla's property. Showed up frequently in visitor logs, and during Margaret's shifts, their meetings were usually short and held in locations with little surveillance coverage. But Olivia was interested in the dates of these visits, because they increased whenever James's appeals procedure moved forward at an unforeseen meeting in the prisons. Margaret's well-preserved facade eventually gave up in the break room as she trembled around a cup of cold water. Coffee, she started talking about how everything changed that night, and she whispered to Bobby that he wasn't intended to be there. The revelation was cut short by an urgent call from the barely audible voice that none of us were supposed to be there. Bailey's condition at the veterinary clinic had stabilized, but while receiving treatment, they had found a small, old but undamaged data card implanted in his collar. The veterinarian had presumed it was a typical ID chip until a closer look showed it was something completely different. Bobby Harris was seen going inside the warden's office as the prison was humming with strange activity. Upset through the grapevine, Olivia discovered that he had insisted that all of the previous month's security footage be examined and claimed it was a part of a regular audit, but Olivia said the timing was too good for it to be a coincidence. As she was assembling the pieces of truth she had collected in her office that evening, an unexpected ally appeared. She was approached by a junior guard who was new to the institution and informed her about odd late-night interactions between him and Bobby prisoners in the old records room of the prison. He had seen Margaret and Bobby sharing papers and having private conversations. Olivia the following morning received an anonymous letter with pictures from the prisons from the day she was arrested. The letters were dated February 12th, early morning after prison, and referred to her prisoners. Olivia the photos captured by prison security cameras. In one picture, he seemed to be taking something out of the evidence storage room while Margaret was on duty. Either directly or indirectly, she was the target of a therapeutic session that ought to have remained unaltered for years. Bailey's peculiar actions throughout his trips now assumed new meaning. The dog's violent response to Mar's flight to the warden's office and the bloody cloth weren't coincidental happenings, but fragments of a bigger picture that the devoted golden retriever appeared to be attempting to convey to them. It might alter everything. Late that evening, Olivia was getting ready to leave her office when she saw Margaret standing there. The guard's customary tight posture had vanished, leaving him alone in the poorly lighted corridor. replaced by the mannerisms of someone bearing an intolerable burden. Their gazes locked, and Olivia realized then. The absence of movement suggested a far greater pain than words, and Olivia began to. Margaret Hayes was prepared to speak, and her admission would upend the case against James itself. When Margaret Hayes finally spoke, the fluorescent lights in the deserted break room flickered. As years of suppressed truth started to come to light in Margaret's hands, Dr. Olivia Carter sat across from her, her heart racing. She shook as she wrapped them around a foam cup. "And I lied," her normally stern manner breaking like a battered wall. "Margaret admitted in my first testimony that I had lied," her voice scarcely audible above a whisper. "I believed I was doing the right thing by protecting Bobby Harris." Stopped and took a trembling breath. "Bobby persuaded me that James was at fault and that justice was being served, but Bailey." That as Margaret's story progressed, Olivia discovered how Bobby knew he always knew. The surveillance tape, which had suddenly disappeared, revealed that Harris had falsified testimony and evidence. The plastic bag Margaret had been seen holding in the most recent footage contained original. Bailey was there in the evidence room that evening when Bobby gave her instructions to remove some documents, so Margaret carried on with her. End of transcript. He saw everything, and his voice became stronger with each revelation, which is why Bob has been so desperate to keep him away from the prison, which is why she struggled with remorse, leaving lasting scars on her. Someone attempted to mute him because of his face, but Bailey was making a noise in the veterinary clinic across town. Amazing recuperation, the ancient golden retriever's fortitude appeared almost deliberate, as though he recognized the vital part he played in revealing the truth. Damaged files were discovered on the data card in his collar, but tech experts were putting in endless effort to retrieve its contents, and Olivia's inquiry accelerated as more. A janitor who worked in the prison came forward and said that she had seen Bobby Harris in restricted areas late one night for weeks. A retired guard recalled Bailey's peculiar behavior on his first visit to the prison before to James's arrest. The breakthrough occurred after the dog had guided them to a storage cupboard years prior, where the evidence had been momentarily concealed. There were pieces of security footage on the card when the computer team eventually translated the data from Bailey's collar. On the night of the incident, which showed Bobby Harris in precarious circumstances that were in direct opposition to his official custody. The investigators had searched the memory of the data for any details concerning Bailey. Testimony, the video had been automatically transferred to the integrated chip in the collar, which is a security measure. An investigator could then directly examine the system that no one had considered to verify Robert Bobby Harris's meticulously crafted facade started to fall apart. Regular trips to the prison had been more than simply seeing how his former co-workers were doing. He had been methodically exploited by the prison itself to protect himself from retribution. Margaret's testimony exposed a convoluted web of deceit with Bobby at its center after evidence was removed and altered. While an innocent guy suffered repercussions, the center manipulated everyone around him to preserve his reputation. Carter put forth a lot of effort to gather all the new evidence from the blood-stained cloth. The DNA evidence that Bailey had discovered next to the warden's office turned out to be an essential component of the jigsaw. That would clear James. The dog's unexplainable actions during his visits weren't coincidental. Rather, they were precise. As the pieces came together, Olivia felt that she had to act quickly to reveal the truth. Had to provide the governor with all of this material right now because the evidence of the compromised security was overwhelming. Video, Margaret's sworn declaration, the DNA test, and, above all, the chronology of incidents demonstrating James Callahan's innocence. Bailey's contribution to revealing the truth grew more evident. His responses to Bobby and Margaret, his calculated maneuvers within the prison, and even his alleged mishap. An almost supernatural knowledge of the injustice that had befallen the faithful was represented by the fabric. Race against time. Olivia was going to change everything because the dog had never abandoned his owner. To deliver the fresh proof to the governor's office, But the intra-prison communication networks went down inexplicably, and her cell phone displayed no signal. Someone was still attempting to keep the facts from coming out. She knew she needed to find a different means to spread the word before it was too late, because her alternatives were limited. Olivia made a last-ditch decision as the clock continued to click mercilessly forward. As she hurried to her car, she realized that she would have to drive the proof personally to the governor's office. The devoted golden retriever Bailey had once again gotten away from the veterinary clinic and was somehow making his way returning to the prison, as though he was aware that he would have to be there one more time to guarantee that justice would prevail over traffic. Dr. Olivia Carter clenched her driving wheel as she traveled at a painful pace down the highway to the governor's office. The evidence folder weighed heavily in her passenger seat as she watched the crucial minutes pass on the dashboard clock, a weight that appeared to symbolize the seriousness of all the issues back at Blackwood State Penitentiary. Bailey had somehow gotten into the building's grounds, and the golden retriever was seen on security cameras. The old hound appeared to be trailing an invisible force as it moved through the prison's exterior spaces with unexpected stealth. Following his methodical and intentional motions, Margaret Hayes paced the guard station with anxiety. Confession: she continued to observe the security cameras via her eyes after lifting one weight, only to replace it with another, alternating between the screens tracking Bobby Harris's increasingly unpredictable behavior and those displaying Bailey's growth. "He's searching the facilities for a certain thing," Margaret murmured to herself as she observed Bailey. "He was usually more intelligent than we gave him credit for. The dog's behavior when we stopped at a rarely used maintenance access brought up memories of that fatal night years ago when she had initially trusted Bob's lies above her own intuition." Olivia, meantime, was caught in traffic due to a serious collision in front of her, and her phone's GPS indicated no verified addresses on the signature line subscribed to the file. She attempted desperately to submit the documents by switching routes that would allow her to reach the governor's office in time, digitally, but the files were too big, and other drivers' attempts to use the cellular network caused it to become overloaded. Bailey's presence during the incident inside the prison had an unanticipated knock-on effect on the dog's health. A seasoned maintenance worker addressed the long-term employees, whose recollections were evoked by a determined search pattern. "Margaret," he pointed at the dog with a disturbed expression on his face. His eyes are expanding as he heads near the old storage area, which is where he halted, according to the security footage. Bobby Harris, now conscious of Bailey's return, moved with growing desperation through the security cameras in the prison corridors, caught him entering forbidden areas. His frightened demeanor is no longer concealed by his prior law enforcement credentials. He shouted louder and hurried to the room. In her car, Olivia, he appeared to be looking for something, or attempting to conceal something before it might be found. Took the snap choice to pull into the shoulder and start cautiously negotiating the traffic jam. "Exit the car," he told the driver, and looked the other way, out of the windshield. A police trooper approached her car with flashing hazard lights, yet something in her face and the intensity of her fears required another resolution. He listened to her explanation, and after looking over her qualifications and the purpose of her mission, he provided an first-of-a-kind solution to navigate the traffic with emergency vehicles already present at Blackwood. The dog patiently sat in a forgotten maintenance tunnel that Bailey had guided security to, heard a particular wall portion moaning quietly while maintenance crews removed. The original surveillance footage was discovered in a concealed recess with a sealed evidence bag. The audio that would establish James's innocence was lost years ago. As Margaret made copies of the tape's contents, her hands trembled because years of complicity and shame threatened to overwhelm her, but she compelled herself to finally concentrate on doing what was right. She was aware that Bobby would attempt to prevent them from revealing the truth, but she was tired of being controlled by her co-workers' lies. While Olivia hurried with her police escort into the governor's office, her phone eventually connected to a carousel. The messages were overflowing with urgent information regarding Bailey's discovery. Concealed evidence and Bobby's progressively frantic efforts to keep everything under control, the reality was crumbling more quickly than anyone could have predicted because of one devoted dog's perseverance, and the sun started to set. Bailey's prison yard is covered in long shadows created by the Texas horizon. Apparently having completed his task, he proceeded to the visitor area where James awaited the dog's arrival. Bailey appeared to possess an unknowable assurance, as though he knew that justice would ultimately triumph. Staff personnel rushed to process the incoming material in the governor's office, where the evidence was overwhelming, and everyone was captivated by the tale of a devoted dog's contribution to the discovery of the truth. But as the remaining pieces of the puzzle came together, Bobby Harris made a last-ditch effort that would compel everyone inside the governor's office to face the full weight of their decisions and their repercussions. The tension was high as staff members went over the growing evidence that Dr. Olivia Carter was standing in front of. His legal team steadfastly presented the CCTV film as part of their case. The DNA evidence and Margaret's sworn confession demonstrated Bobby Harris's dishonesty, yet at the same time, in a last-ditch effort to keep everything under control, Bobby Harris of Blackwood State Penitentiary stormed into the office of the National Security Affairs. Access to the monitoring system is being demanded by the security office. This is official police business, he insisted. His apparent desperation was causing the previous authority to crumble, but the security personnel were well aware of the. As events unfolded, Bailey remained motionless in the visiting area with James before the golden wheel. The sound of approaching footsteps caused the retriever's ears to perk up, and his body tightened through the windows. Margaret, with her fingers hanging over the emergency alert button, Hayes watched the scene play out. She had at last selected an assistant, and this time it was the correct one. A junior guard in a peaceful area of the prison found an unexpected item on an outdated computer terminal, a number of encrypted emails that described talks between Bobby and a number of other officials that exposed a convoluted network of threats and favors that had maintained the runaway, and the guard forewarned Dr. Carter of the long-buried truth right away. And Olivia's phone rang with the new information about the encrypted emails as she was wrapping up her presentation to the governor's team, supplied the last piece of information, proving the cover-up's methodical nature. The evidence was no longer. A single erroneous conviction revealed a pattern of corruption that necessitated prompt retribution. When Blackwood Bobby was challenged by prison officials and his own growing blunders, his facade totally collapsed. "To unwind, you don't comprehend," he yelled, his voice reverberating through the hallways. "I had to safeguard the one mistake could have destroyed the department's image." And Margaret was finally watching from a distance. She had discovered her voice and stated forcefully that it was about your ego, not the department's image, Bobby. The words remained thick in the air for years. You couldn't admit you made a mistake, so an innocent man paid the price. Bailey's contribution to revealing the truth had become legendary within the jail community. After the repressed truth was ultimately out, the steadfast devotion of the senior canines and their apparently supernatural capacity to find important evidence had moved even the hardest-hearted hearts. And as the word got around the hospital, more people shared their own experiences. The legal team in the governor's office was working feverishly to process the influx of new information. The evidence was convincing, and when Dr. Carter's phone rang, Margaret answered, phoning, with one last revelation. Years ago, when they were speaking, Bobby had unintentionally acknowledged his involvement in framing James, and Margaret had made a covert recording of it, although it was ancient and Bobby's voice was considerably garbled. But James Callahan was convenient. His garage was nearby, he lacked an alibi, and who would trust a mechanic over a distinguished police officer? Together with the tangible proof Bailey had assisted in locating, admission completed the image of injustice, as long shadows were formed over the jail grounds as the sun started to drop over Texas. "Do you need any help?" The devoted dog appeared to sense the changing tides of justice in the world as Bailey slept peacefully at James's feet. Pens from the governor's office scribbled on paper as formal directives were written in. James's computer glowed pinkish-brown as the data came through, scribbled on a piece of paper. Pens from the governor's office scribbled on paper as formal directives were written in. Bobby Harris stood in startled silence in the prison hallways, recalling his years of deceit. When Dr. Carter's phone was ultimately uncovered, it displayed an urgent message from the governor's office. The words on the screen scrambled through her daze. Through her tears of relief, the screen blurred, granting her an emergency stay and ordering a comprehensive review of the message. It was more than just a court ruling. It was confirmation of years of steadfast faith and resolve beyond the... Reporters from prison walls started to assemble as news of the unfolding story of an elderly golden fox appeared on the screen. The public was captivated by the retriever's part in revealing the truth. But a quiet visitation took place within Blackwood. None of that mattered in the room. James sat with his devoted companion, now at rest, seeing that deceit had been defeated by truth. The governor's emergency order sent shockwaves through town communities. As word got out, there was a noticeable change in the atmosphere at Blackwood State Penitentiary. A celebrated professor reportedly remembered this training and spoke with a genuine tie to the protesters, promising that they would understand his meaning. Peering serenely at the images of the victims climbing toward the reception area in the lower half of the prison. Dr. Olivia Carter observed the occurrences in each corridor with a mix of fear and hope and relief, which caused both relief and anxiety. Bobby Har sat in the administrative holding section of the prison, watching his well-built world fall apart. The former officer's manner had drastically changed around him. The confident swagger had been replaced with a gloomy Margaret Hayes' appearance as someone dealing with the fallout after years of deceit. Stood watch with a composed, businesslike demeanor, but her eyes conveyed a wide range of emotions. Bailey stayed with James in the visitation room, and the presence of the senior golden retriever provided comfort. In the flurry of activity, the dog's remarkable behavior had revealed the truth and captured the prison workers visited throughout the day, some bringing delicacies, touching the hearts of all those involved in the case. Bailey, some merely wishing to observe the extraordinary human-dog bond that Dr. Carter's staff had developed. Teams of legal specialists looked over the evidence Bailey had at the center of the inquiry, helped reveal the hidden truth about how a dog's instincts had triumphed where human justice had failed. Every detail was revealed by the CCTV film, DNA evidence, and encrypted communications. An account of a pattern of dishonesty that almost lost an innocent man everything Margaret had documented. Talking with Bobby turned out to be especially damaging when legal professionals examined the tape they found. Minor background sounds that supported the chronology James had maintained throughout the recording. Bobby had unintentionally revealed something that only someone who was physically present that evening would have known. Disclosed in an unguarded moment of candor, while Bailey's veterinarian worked on Bailey and his family's rescue operation, he overlooked this. When he arrived at the prison to see how well he was recovering from the poisoning attempt, an examination discovered a tiny scar behind the dog's ear, which appeared to be the result of someone attempting to take out his original tracking chip. When this discovery was made years ago, investigators began to wonder when and why someone had tried to meddle with. The legal team put forth a lot of effort to process the dog's identification in the governor's office. Pile of fresh data. Every document they looked at exposed more profound levels of corruption, that Bobby's influence had affected other investigations and choices throughout his career, going well beyond James's case. Back at Blackwood, the ramifications were profound, and it became clear that all of his cases needed to be thoroughly reviewed. A retired jail guard who had previously worked the night shift paid Olivia an unexpected visit. He brought an old logbook with him that included thorough notes about odd things he had seen, such as Bobby Harris had often entered restricted areas at strange hours, and the guard had recorded this in the logbook, and Merrill filled it with scraps of paper, which he gathered immediately after the accident. Due to a persistent feeling that something wasn't quite right, and now his intuition was confirmed, Bailey's behavior kept everyone in awe. The dog appeared to possess an extraordinary capacity to respond to important events in the case. He would become awake and focused while Bobby Harris was discussing crucial evidence in the case, said that his hackles would lift a little, as though he fully comprehended every nuance of the situation that was developing. As nightfall drew near, Dr. Carter was presented with yet another important piece of evidence. Something surprising was discovered when forensic examination of the blood-stained cloth Bailey had discovered. Trace components that were inconsistent with Bobby's initial statement and could only have originated from a particular place to his location that evening. And the ramifications of all these findings reverberated across the legal system. In the governor's office, phones rang non-stop as officials rushed to handle the scenario that journalists had assembled for. Cameras outside the jail gates show the constant flow of investigators and legal professionals coming in. While departing the establishment in a peaceful time amidst the commotion, Olivia discovered herself by herself with Margaret in the stress of the previous events was evident on the guard's face in the break room, but she also looked relieved. "I should have spoken up sooner," Margaret whispered quietly as she gazed into her coffee cup while observing Bailey's unwavering loyalty. "I came to see that some realities cannot be permanently concealed." The morning sun casts long shadows. The Blackwood State Penitentiary windows as Dr. Olivia Carter went over the most recent advancements in her case files. The amount of evidence against Bobby Harris had increased dramatically since Bailey's findings. Every new bit of evidence delivered devastating the life of an innocent man in the prison's technicians from the security office labored to repair damaged portions of the CCTV film after being guided by Bailey. Timestamps and pixelated clarity revealed the truth frame by frame, aligned flawlessly with James's initial alibi, which showed Bobby Harris in locations he had swore he had never gone. Bailey, who was still recuperating from his ordeal, had gained some notoriety among the elderly in the prison walls. During his visits, the Golden Retriever's remarkable deeds had motivated even the most pessimistic employees. He maintained a near-supernatural awareness of his surroundings, especially when he is close to locations with important evidence. Margaret Hayes had started writing down every item she could recall from her years of silence. Predicted the covert threats and trickery Bobby had employed to keep power, and he understood just how, in a long interview, she told Olivia that he took advantage of our trust by making us think we were defending the system, when in reality we were only shielding his lies. And the tension in the jail atmosphere reached unprecedented heights. When detectives found a secret document stash in an abandoned maintenance tunnel in the same location where Bailey had displayed such keen interest during his prior visits, the documents exposed a convoluted web of favors and, over the years, Bobby had made arrangements with the legal team to keep his power in the governor's office. Diligently processed the growing body of facts, and every new finding reinforced James's argument for exoneration. The blood-stained fabric's DNA research produced surprising findings linking to other unresolved cases that, when analyzed through the prism of Bobby's participation with Bailey's, during a follow-up examination, the veterinarian discovered something fascinating. The scar behind the dog's ear contained little pieces of an outdated tracking chip that was older than his typical pet. This revelation prompted investigators to inquire as to whether Bobby had tried to obstruct possible evidence. The case's ramifications had already begun to spread throughout the criminal justice system. More convictions like Bobby Harris followed. Testimonies were re-examined, files were removed from storage, and the pattern of questionable irregularities surfaced. And it turned out that the corruption was more widespread than anyone had first thought. As more witnesses came forward, Carter's office became a hive of activity. A former evidence clerk recounted Bobby's remarkable interest in specific case files, recalling odd conversations overheard in the courthouse by a former bailiff. Bailey had assisted in revealing the media attention regarding passageways, and each account contributed a new piece to the picture. Reporters see outside the jail gates reported on the case as it became more intense. Their cameras recorded everyone who came into or went out of the building, telling the tale of a devoted dog's contribution to revealing the truth at a respectable, well-known time. The public's attention had been drawn to corruption, but for those who were inside Blackwood's walls, it was much more than merely a touching story. Olivia got an urgent call from the forensics team as nightfall drew near. Something remarkable had been found when Bailey's first tracking chip was analyzed. It included garbled but recoverable location information from the night of the tragedy. The ramifications were astounding, and Bobby's own proof attempted to destroy could be the secret to realizing the extent of his deceit in the privacy of her workplace. His examination of security video captures Bailey's most recent trips to the dogs department. His actions demonstrated a distinct pattern. He frequently called attention to particular prison regions that subsequently proved essential to the inquiry. It seemed as though he had been waiting to tell them something. The forensics lab was bustling with activity as technicians patiently waited for people to comprehend his mute testimony. Dr. Olivia Carter was standing there observing the screens while she tried to get data from Bailey's original tracking ship, racing as the faulty device gradually released bits of location data. Every recovered coordinate revealed a piece of a long-hidden tale that would ultimately put things in order. As additional information became available, Bobby Harris became more and more angry in his makeshift detention facility. His requests to talk to his former police coworkers were turned down, and his efforts to get in touch with those outside the former officer's meticulously built world was coming apart, thread by thread, in a prison that was well watched. Because of the nearly legendary nature of Bailey's presence at the institution, staff members observed how the elderly would different parts of the facility would cause golden retrievers to react differently, being especially vigilant close to places where it was later found that he continued to act in an aggressive manner toward Bobby Harris. Margaret Hayes had started collaborating actively with the investigation, which was a stark contrast to his typically kind manner. During one session, she disclosed that her in-depth understanding of the prison's functioning was quite helpful. In the fact something that chilled Olivia's blood, Bobby did more than falsify the facts. She clarified her voice. He was frightened and had a large network of people who owed him favors but would ignore documentation. Disappeared, or security cameras inexplicably stopped working. The governor's legal team had increased its efforts. The pattern they found after examining each case Bobby Harris had worked on during his tenure was unsettling evidence manipulation that went well beyond James's case resulted in several convictions presently being examined, and the consequences for the legal system were astounding in the evidence room of the prison. Behind a loose panel, detectives discovered another important finding. They discovered a notepad among a collection of original case files that ought to have been destroyed years ago. Included in-depth notes of James's daily activities before to his arrest that could only have been created by an unauthorized monitoring operator. Bailey's veterinarian had emerged as an unexpected ally in the dog's ailments, and therapies over time showed a trend of suspicious events. Every time Bailey had come near to learning something significant, he had inexplicably disappeared. Attempts to quiet him had started long before his death, either because he had fallen ill or been hurt. The data recovery team eventually made progress with the tracking chip at the reconstructed site after recent poisoning. Information on Bailey's activities the night of the event indicated that he and his owner, James Miles, were away. More significantly, it depicted Bobby Harris in locations where he had sworn oaths that he had never been to. Maps monitored the links, and Carter's office had evolved into a command center for the growing investigative wall. between bits of evidence while computers analyzed many documents in search of trends. Bailey was always there, and his composed manner stood in sharp contrast to the commotion in the media surrounding him. The circus outside Blackwood had expanded rapidly, and reporters were vying for any available space while press vans lined the streets. New information regarding the case. Bailey's part in revealing the truth had brought the story to national prominence. Late that night, Olivia became a symbol of justice and unwavering loyalty. Lafitte examined the surveillance tape from the evening of James's arrest and saw an oddity in one frame's background. A reflection in a window, just barely discernible, showed Bobby Harris taking something out of his automobile that watched the video and compared it to the description of the evidence that was eventually used against James Margaret. Olivia was abruptly reminded of a discussion she had heard years prior in which Bobby had been debating someone on with the phone, demanding that loose ends be restrained at the moment, but she brushed it off as standard police business. With everything they learned, the tension in Blackwood State Penitentiary gave those words a sinister new meaning, intensified as Dr. Olivia Carter's new revelations kept coming to light. Sat in her office with piles of evidence files all around her, each one adding a new layer to the intricate network of Bobby Harris's deceit, seemed to grow more pronounced with each passing day, as did the clock on her wall. At this point, Bailey's presence had turned into a continual source of consolation and direction for the elderly Goldfielder. In one instance, the retriever had formed an almost eerie habit of guiding investigators to important pieces of evidence. This was important because they could then hire a dog to carry out the work. Most noteworthy instance, when he started pouring at a particular southeast corner of the prison's archive room floor, which resulted in the very first secret documents that Bobby had tried to hide were found, Margaret Hayes assumed a new role as a crucial observer. Her statement became more compelling as further proof supported her story. Throughout a protracted interview with she disclosed information to the governor's legal team that completely altered the investigation's scope. And Bobby didn't merely press charges against the governor's wife and daughter. After furnishing information that James had a system that he understood exactly how to create in order to manipulate the evidence in his case. He often exploited the forensics team working on Bailey's case to show that innocent people appeared guilty. Another innovation made by the initial tracking chip was the discovery of audio recording fragments concealed within the damaged data. Despite partially degrading the chip, it had managed to record discussions from the night of the incident. Bobby Harris was caught on tape participating in questionable actions that he had previously denied under oath in the jail. A technician with the jail security office found that the monitoring system had been set up with subtle anomalies. Cameras would inexplicably stop working at particular moments, leaving handy gaps in which he would be likely to be mistaken, but which he apparently couldn't fill without delicate regions of the institution, a trend that couldn't be explained. Written off as a coincidence, Bailey's veterinarian provided more proof of the attempts to quiet. The medical records of the devoted dog revealed a pattern of questionable occurrences that precisely corresponded with significant events in the district attorney's case files. Every time Bailey came near to revealing the truth during the investigation, something intervened to thwart the governor's recent poisoning attempt. Was only the most recent in a lengthy string of intentional actions. Office had taken a more active role in the case, with groups of legal professionals working non-stop to handle the growing evidence that Bobby's actions had repercussions that went well beyond James's erroneous conviction. They threatens to upend Texas's legal system's foundation. Dr. Carter had a surprise visit. From Bobby's old police department co-worker, the retired cop carried a personal journal he had kept for years while serving on the force. The pages were filled with in-depth insights regarding Bobby's dubious actions and dubious tactics, which the officer had been too scared to. Dr. Carter had a surprise visit from Bobby's old police department co-worker. The officer had been too scared to report formally. As dusk drew near, Margaret revealed yet another important discovery. Several days prior, she recalled seeing Bobby meet with someone late at night in the jail parking lot. The visitor had given Bobby the same bundle that James had been arrested with, later surfaced in evidence against James, but Margaret's surveillance footage from that evening had inexplicably vanished. Bailey's behavior continued to intrigue everyone concerned, and the detailed testimony added another piece to the jigsaw. When investigators examined the case, the dog appeared to have an almost supernatural capacity to spot dishonesty. On prior interview recordings, they saw that Bailey had responded strongly to some claims that turned out to be false. In her office, Olivia went over the time frame they had, and his intuition had been telling them something all along. Bailey had assisted them in discovering every piece of evidence, witness, and document that pointed to, according to a meticulously planned scheme, to pose the query that not only how Bobby had been able to fool everyone for so long, but also the reason he had selected James as his target. The solution became apparent when detectives found a link between Bobby's history and James's previous activities. Evidence that James had unintentionally witnessed something years earlier was concealed in the recovered data from his company. Bobby needed to conceal something long ago from the loyal. The only other witness that evening was a golden retriever, who was now at last assisting in revealing the truth. Scott? As the investigation approached its crucial stage, the corridors of Blackwood State Penitentiary hummed with unprecedented activity. Dr. Olivia Carter spent several hours in her office assembling the last remaining burial services. As part of Bobby Harris's complex scheme, the link between James's garage and Bobby's past had created a fresh line of inquiry that had not been investigated before. To Bailey's involvement in the facility was now more important than before, and the behavior of the older golden retrievers continued to offer priceless advice to investigators when on a routine tour of the administrative area of the prison. He unexpectedly halted at a specific filing cabinet and persistently peered at it. When detectives looked into the cabinet, they found a fake bottom with documents Bobby had concealed for years, and Margaret Hayes is now totally dedicated to Bobby. Revealing the truth gave these new findings crucial context. During a rigorous debriefing process, she disclosed that he used to spend hours in the records room and claimed to be examining cold cases, but now I see that he was genuinely manipulating the facts to create a misleading forensics team. Made a breakthrough with the discovered evidence that would shield him and implicate James. Using sophisticated enhancing techniques, they were able to see Bobby Harris interfering with security footage. Evidence in the hours prior to James's arrest, as indicated by the video's timestamp, added another layer to Bobby's web of lies by disputing his sworn statement on his whereabouts that evening. While looking through the dog's old medical records, Bailey's veterinarian made an interesting discovery. He discovered a pattern of questionable occurrences that aligned with significant dates in the inquiry each time Bailey had been on the verge of disclosing something significant, but he had inexplicably become ill or been hurt by the recent poisoning. This wasn't a one-off event. Rather, it was a part of a larger campaign to silence a key witness in the attorneys from the governor's office, labored feverishly to evaluate the plethora of fresh data and the consequences of their conclusions. Their conclusions went well beyond Bobby's manipulation of James's case, evidence that might have impacted dozens of additional instances, raising doubts about the integrity of innumerable convictions. A former mechanic unexpectedly paid Dr. Carter a visit. When the man worked at James's garage, he brought an old logbook with thorough records on every car. One entry that caught our attention was a police car that was registered to Bobby. On the night in question, Harris had been brought in for repairs, but the official police car logs revealed no record of this visit. Margaret's statement grew more specific as she remembered more evidence, observing Bobby having a late-night meeting with someone in the jail parking lot a few days prior to James's arrest. Had sent Bobby a gift, the identical thing that eventually surfaced in security film against James. Night had mysteriously vanished. But Margaret's thorough testimony provided yet another important clue. Investigators were nevertheless intrigued by Bailey's behavior in several parts of the facility. The dog appeared to exaggerate his outbursts, were especially aroused close to the evidence storage room where many of the forged documents had been stored. These weren't arbitrary, rather they aligned with a person who was well aware of the governor's legal team's needs. Discovered something shocking while looking through old case files. Buried in ordinary papers were notes written in Bobby's handwriting, which included plans to falsify testimony and evidence, showed a well-thought-out plot to destroy James was framed late that night, exploiting his proximity to the site and his lack of an alibi as easy means of deceit. Olivia saw something strange in the backdrop of the security footage from James's arrest that evening. Bailey was hardly visible in the video, but his actions were telling. Stella was frantically attempting to guide officers away from the situation, not displaying signs of aggression or fear, as time ran out, the urgency to finish the inquiry increased because they realized they were following a false trail. All of the evidence they found suggested a complex plot masterminded by Bobby Harris, but as they tried to close the ditches to keep his reputation intact, Bobby rushed to gather everything for the governor's last evaluation. Time appeared to stop in the face of deceit, an act that would bring the case to its dramatic conclusion. Blackwood State Penitentiary hallways as Dr. Olivia Carter rushed to stop Bobby Harris's final. In a desperate move that rocked the facility, he somehow gained access to the prison's computer. As the governor was trying to remove important evidence before Bailey, the governor, could see it, Vigilant had. As the tension increased, the older golden retrievers became more focused and anxious. More than ever, directing detectives to previously unnoticed parts of the prison, his actions appeared to her almost thoughtful, as though he recognized the significance of each minute Margaret had and the gravity of their goal. With her years of knowledge, Hayes urgently collaborated with the IT staff to retrieve the files Bobby had attempted to erase. He believes he can remove the evidence, but the prison systems proved beneficial in their efforts to preserve it. She said that her fingers were flying over the keyboard, but he was unaware of how many backups we had made. Legal professionals went over the mass of evidence in the governor's office, which had become a center of intensive activity, while technical experts labored to confirm each document's legitimacy and describe the consequences of their results that went much beyond James's case and threatened to reveal years of institutionalized wrongdoing. Bailey's recent attempt had gained new importance after investigators found connections to related instances in other. The veterinarian's thorough records of the cases Bobby had treated showed a pattern of intimidation, that long history of focusing on anything or anyone that could reveal the truth. The forensics team examining Bailey's tracking chip called Carter urgently after they had successfully retrieved additional information, such as fragmentary audio recordings from the night of the incident. However, it was evident that Bobby was contemplating preparations to tamper with the evidence in the prison. Screens flickered with activity as security center staff attempted to stop Bobby's cyber attack. Additional attempts to access and modify documents in other locations were revealed by his digital footprints. His web of deceit was further layered by discovery, and Margaret's testimony had grown more important as more evidence surfaced. She remembered certain exchanges with Bobby that, although initially innocuous, now carried. Her meticulous recollection of the events gave the background necessary to fully comprehend the sinister implications. The manner in which Bobby had used Iris, for better or for worse, his program of Bailey's presence in the hospital has become practically legendary among the workers due to the extent of his influence. Even the most jaded cops had been moved by the dog's unrelenting commitment to revealing the truth, and his responses to some locations and individuals had been extremely helpful in directing the inquiry. The anxiety increased as Olivia received what seemed to be a comprehensive record of everything that had transpired. Word that the governor's office needed to have all of the proof gathered and submitted in a matter of hours. Clarity was required before acting, and each document had to be checked and compared in a worry. Unexpectedly, more witnesses started to come forward. Former prisoners, guards, and administrative officials shared their personal encounters with Bobby's manipulation. Each report contributed a new element to the jigsaw, forming a thorough explanation of how he had continued to act dishonestly for so long. Bailey's actions became more focused as the due date drew near. The dog guided investigators to an abandoned storage space, where they found more records Bobby had concealed for years. The documents offered vital background information for comprehending his reasons and strategies. As darkness descended on Blackwood, Dr. Carter labored frantically to arrange the governor's office final presentation because the evidence of fabricated documents was overwhelming. Fabricated statements, tampered with surveillance footage, and most significantly, the Bobby's unquestionable pattern of dishonesty was coming to an end. But the truth was finally revealing everything at once. Bobby's last-ditch effort to remove the proof had simply revealed more of his deceit. As Olivia got ready to turn in the last of the paperwork, she discovered that Alaska was impressed with the entire scheme had been Bailey's steadfast devotion and perseverance. Dr. Olivia Carter's office saw the stressful final hour at Blackwood State Penitentiary had changed into a command center where all of Bobby Harris's evidence was being carefully timelines, and links were arranged on the walls, each of which pointed back to the truth that Bailey held. It was more important than ever to find out why Bailey was in the facility. The ancient golden retriever's behavior became more passionate as he became aware of the growing tension during a meeting. He abruptly stopped at the entrance to the old records room during his last stroll around the prison's hallways, whole body attentive and concentrated, and when investigators took his lead, they found a concealed panel with Bobby's initial notes regarding the framing James that Margaret Hayes co-authored. As they battled to preserve the evidence, the technical team's understanding of the prison systems proved vital. Bobby attempted to erase all of the files, but he left a trace behind. Pointed to patterns on her screen to clarify that he wasn't merely hiding his footprints. Rather, he was mapping out. The squad staggered back. The governor's legal team had established a temporary office within the prison to conceal anything he wished to conceal. Worked non-stop to assess the deluge of fresh data. Every piece of evidence they examined showed more layers of Bobby's dishonesty. The recovered documents, witness accounts, and surveillance footage presented at the Bailey's veterinarian showed up with an image of the methodical manipulation that had almost ended the life of an innocent man. Further medical documents that aided in creating a timeline of the dog's involvement in each occurrence. Feeling hurt or ill was a wonderful fit for when he had come too near to revealing the truth. There was no denying the pattern. Someone had been methodically attempting to quiet Dr. Carter, the four-legged witness. Got an urgent message from the forensics team that was working on the data they had managed to extract from Bailey's tracking chip. To retrieve other audio snippets, such as a dialogue in which Bobby talked about his intentions to manipulate evidence, that his voice was distinct, even if the recording was somewhat deteriorated. As he intended, technicians from the prison's primary security center worked tirelessly. In a desperate attempt to thwart Bobby's last-ditch efforts to sabotage the inquiry, screens showed many deaths, including 2 minors, both murders. "Exercise," the sergeant said with a frown as he read the screen. Security feeds as they monitored his whereabouts and stopped any additional manipulation of vital evidence. That Margaret's testimony had become the catalyst for his desperate acts, which only served to expose more of his prior deceptions. Foundation of Bobby's case, including her thorough reports of his actions throughout the years, and the tangible Bailey had contributed to the discovery of evidence that solidified the story of her voice being manipulated and corrupted. She filmed her final statement, shaking with passion as she finally broke free Bailey's years of repressed truth. The investigation team had not overlooked the dog's exceptionally accurate instincts, which allowed it to find important evidence in response to particular people, had been crucial throughout the case, and his actions regarding Bobby had always been antagonistic. But he never faltered in his tenderness toward James, as though he had understood the truth. The strain increased when Olivia learned that the governor's office needed the final submission of all evidence within the hour. The group worked diligently to make sure that every James's future depended on their ability to properly verify the document and corroborate each piece of testimony. Thoroughness, Bailey grew more agitated as the deadline drew near. He paced close to the evidence room, staring at a particular cabinet while investigators took one last look at it. When they found a secret chamber, they found Bobby's personal logbook, which had a thorough record of his life. The systematic corruption which he had proudly preserved as a memento of his deceit appeared to be happening at an undiscriminated pace. As Dr. Carter got ready to turn in the last paperwork, the years of faked testimonies, manipulated records, and altered evidence all combined to provide overwhelming evidence, highlighting Bobby's complex plan to frame an innocent man throughout it all. As the sun started to drop over Blackwood, long shadows were cast by Bailey, who had never faltered in his efforts to reveal the truth. Legal professionals conducted their last assessment of the governor's temporary office through the jail windows. As Olivia observed them at work, the evidence they had gathered was unprecedented in its breadth and consequences. She understood that the atmosphere would not have existed without Bailey's amazing dedication. Tension erupted in Blackwood State Penitentiary when Dr. Olivia Carter completed her last preparations. The governor's office received the evidence against Bobby Harris, and now the future hung in the balance. Every second of the waiting seemed to drag on forever. Bailey was unusually composed in spite of the turmoil surrounding him. The ancient golden retriever was lying close to James. The presence in the visitation area was comforting during these important times. Olivia promptly jumped back on the chair. As the future hung in the balance surrounding James like the visitor to a relic, Bailey was unusually composed in the visitation area was comforting during these important times. His demeanor had subtly changed, and he exuded a peaceful assurance that seemed to indicate that justice was at last within him. For years, Margaret Hayes kept watch in the security center, keeping tabs on any activity within the building. Determined vigilance had taken the place of the period of silence. "Bob is not done yet," she warned, her eyes darting over the displays. Wait, the governor's legal team had established a direct video hookup to their show because he is too proud to concede defeat without one more battle. Office enabling instant communication while they examined the evidence displayed on the screens, which included a variety of officials reviewing records showed solemn faces upon seeing the extent of Bobby's deceit. Bailey's recent activities were now an essential component of the final presentation's video, demonstrated how the dog had methodically guided investigators to crucial evidence, with his actions being too constant to be accidental. Another level of credibility was provided by the veterinarian's coincidental testimony of the attempts to suppress him. Every few minutes, the forensics team provided Dr. Carter with information on the case. They had even studied the scraps left by the proceeding militia. More information from Bailey's tracking chip, such as further audio snippets that further linked Bobby, the knowing that every detail could be important in the process. The technical team worked feverishly to clean up the recordings. Officials from the prison's administrative wing anticipated a number of outcomes after learning that Bobby's testimony was overwhelming. But Olivia had made sure that bureaucracy proceeded at its own speed. Standing a few feet away, she watched the battle between herself and the brutal financial whistleblower and their unfortunate employers fail. Every document was meticulously arranged, every testimony was accurately captured, and Margaret's last remark had been especially powerful, and all of the tangible proof had been safely preserved. She explained in great detail how Bobby had used his position to manipulate the system throughout the years. Her testimony, along with the tangible proof Bailey had assisted in locating, gave him the leverage to continue his deceit. Bailey's remarkable role in revealing the truth had captured an unquestionable image of corruption. Everyone's focus was diverted by the dog's everlasting devotion and resolve. His actions over the course of years of meticulously crafted lies had not only helped establish James's innocence, but also revealed a discrepancy in public records. As Olivia's phone rang, the tension reached a height due to a systemic breakdown that required reform. Buzzed with a message from the governor's office stating that the legal team had finished their preliminary examination and were waiting to respond. The following minutes, as they prepared to give their recommendation, would decide whether justice would ultimately prevail. As they waited, Bailey's ears perked up at a sound, and he became suddenly alert. Everyone in the room could hear that the dog's behavior had been exceptionally consistent throughout the examination. The security center's screens displayed Bobby pacing, and they were holding their breath to see how he would react. The man who had been manipulating the system for so long eventually lost his cool in his holding room. Observing his meticulously built world fall apart around him due to a devoted dog's will to reveal, as they awaited the governor's judgment, time actually seemed to stop. Everyone who had been involved in the case in Blackwood found themselves thinking back on the remarkable series of events that culminated in this particular time. With Bailey, the communication from the governor's office came from an unlikely hero who had never given up on proving his owner's innocence. Showed up with a unique chime that reverberated around Dr. Olivia Carter's workspace. There was total stillness in the room at Blackwood State Penitentiary when she opened her eyes. Her hands shook a little as she read the words that would alter everything in the page on her computer screen. Bailey, who had been quietly resting in a corner, was abruptly lifted when an emergency stay was granted and an instant release order was issued. The aging golden retriever's tail started to wag as though he realized the significance as he raised his head and released a gentle whine. His transformation from devoted friend to crucial witness in the revelation of Margaret Hayes was the final victim of Bobby Harris's deceit. As she got the news after years of bearing the weight of silence, she stood in the doorway, tears flowing down her cheeks. "Had finally come to an end. I should have spoken up sooner," she said in a hoarse murmur. With feeling, but observing Bailey or his steadfast commitment, provided I got the guts to finally speak the truth, since the governor's legal staff had carefully examined each and every piece of evidence that Bailey had assisted in locating each document they had seized, and each testimonial Margaret had given, shown Bobby's systematic corruption of the decision in an indisputable manner, was about admitting a serious flaw in the system, not merely about rescuing an innocent guy. As word spread that the dog was moving with renewed energy, Bailey's behavior throughout the facility changed considerably, guiding officials one last time around the hallways as though performing a thorough examination of the location where he had helped reveal how his incredible journey had changed him from a mere pet to a representation of unshakable loyalty and justice. Dr. Carter was inundated with communications from a variety of authorities and legal professionals. The case's ramifications went much beyond Bobby's and James's release. Evidence manipulation had jeopardized many other cases, and it was now inevitable that his entire career would be reviewed. James would have to replace the malfunctioning device at the security center once technicians took Bobby's approach record. The former officer's confident facade was ultimately destroyed by the man's reaction to the news on tape. Had been abusing the system for a long time and was now being held accountable for his acts due to a dog's. Margaret's role in the investigation had not gone forgotten, as she described her resolve to reveal the truth. Ordinary citizens, unable to read the journals, were banished. Cooperation with investigators and testimony had been essential to comprehending the entire extent of Bobby's. So even though her years of silence had effects, her subsequent bravery in speaking up had been beneficial. Since Bailey's amazing deeds had garnered global attention, news outlets started to make sure justice would prevail, covering the historic instance in which the actions and intuition of a dog revealed years of corruption. The people nationwide were moved by his story of steadfast devotion and resolve, especially the jail personnel. As Bailey led the way to the release processing area, the dog's tail wagged non-stop, and he gazed in wonder, focused on the doors that would soon lead to freedom. Despite the length and peril of his trek, his faith had never. Olivia was unwavering in her organization of the final documentation, any bit of proof. Every declaration and every recovered document would be kept safe to guarantee that such a recovery would never be another miscarriage of justice, because Bailey's contribution to revealing the truth would be irrevocably, officially documented as the sun started to set over Blackwood, casting through the prison windows. Long shadows changed the ambient, transforming the crushing weight of anxiety over time, resulted in the prisoners improving their mental health, appetite, and will to live, and their habits of life transforming with the injustice that had pervaded the facility for so long, started to fade among the personnel and prisoners in the hallways. Everyone sensed the change when the truth ultimately overcame deceit. The ancient golden retriever was sitting alertly next to the main door, and his position was exactly in line with the gateways that would eventually lead to freedom. And he executed his job with unwavering dedication. In spite of all efforts to stop him, was ultimately accomplished, and Bailey's remarkable journey from devoted pet to justice's hero had transformed not just one life, but the system as a whole. As final preparations were made for James's release, the early sun cast a different light on Blackwood State Penitentiary. Were finished. Olivia Carter, the doctor, observed Bailey pacing enthusiastically, close to Belling's age, the vigor of the elderly golden retriever in the processing area. The national media's effort to reveal Bobby Harris's deceit had been more successful than anyone had anticipated. Assembled outside the prison gates with their cameras ready to record the reunion and tell the tale of a devoted dog's life, the public had been captivated by Bailey's involvement in exposing corruption and rescuing an innocent man, and he was more than just a pet. To Margaret, he represented justice and unflinching commitment. Hayes stood silently in the background, her expression expressing relief and regret at her choice to speak at last. Exposing Bobby's deceit had sealed the case, observing Bailey all. She confided in Olivia over the years, and he never gave up or stopped fighting, which is what true loyalty looks like. Because the governor's office had started a thorough investigation of each issue Bobby Harris had dealt with during his career, there would be dozens of convictions that would need to be conducted, a thorough analysis of the institution that had let such corruption to thrive and faced an overdue detection. I can't recommend reckoning Bailey's. Legal professionals and animal behaviorists have taken note of his remarkable journey, noting his capacity to find vital proof that his constant responses to certain people and his persistent resolve had questioned the accepted notion of conniving capabilities at a number of colleges. Dr. Carter had already asked for authorization to examine the case when he learned that Bobby Harris had been sent to the former officer, who had long exploited the system, would be investigated at another site. So basically it was impossible and difficult for law enforcement to examine students at this class because they were both mentally and physically struggled enough to confront justice himself. His meticulously planned universe had fallen apart because to a dog's commitment to revealing the truth to all of the inmates who had gathered to observe the momentous occasion of Bailey's arrival in the facilities in recent weeks had not only altered James's destiny, but also served as a reminder to everyone of the significance of defending the truth, regardless of the repercussions. Margaret's testimony had allowed for the addition of numerous witnesses, came forward every day to relate their own stories of Bobby's corruption. The pattern of manipulation was widespread, deeper than anyone had first thought, and the elderly were all exposed thanks to Bailey's actions. The strong focus of his inquiry days had vanished, as seen by the golden retriever's conduct that morning, replaced by a nearly joyous sense of anticipation, as if he realized that his protracted mission was finally over. After justice was served, Olivia meticulously arranged the last documents, paying close attention to each and every description of the crime. Bailey was preserved, if all the facts and statements were documented, would be documented forever as evidence of the remarkable relationship between people and their dogs. Friends, the environment of the institution had totally changed from the oppressive. Staff and prisoners alike felt the weight of injustice that had hovered over the facility for so long lifted, a reminder that in the last moments of processing, the truth, no matter how deeply buried, may still surface. Bailey's tail wagged steadily as he sat attentively near the main door. Gaze focused on the doors that will shortly be opened by the devoted dog that had persevered through all attempt to silence him, was about to see the media crews outside, see the triumph of justice he had assisted in achieving. Where is the family baby sleeping now? Fought for position in an attempt to record the moment when James would be released. But for the people inside who had seen the genuine narrative of Bailey's incredible journey went well beyond a straightforward case of unjust conviction. It was evidence of the strength of steadfast devotion and resolve, as well as the unbreakable link between a man and his beloved partner. James's first steps as a free man were illumined by the golden light of the early sun at Blackwood State Penitentiary. Dr. Olivia Carter, the elderly golden retriever, was so happy that Bailey ran forward to greet him, knew that this moment symbolized more than just one man's, therefore she watched the reunion with tears in her eyes. Freedom was a victory of devotion over corruption and truth over deceit. The touching moment when James knelt to embrace his devoted friend Bailey, whose tail was waving, was filmed by national media. Years of separation vanished in moments of pure bliss as he smothered his owner's face with passionate kisses. Joy was finally reunited with the guy who had never lost hope and had resisted all attempts to quiet him. He stood at a respectable distance, having put forth a great deal of effort to save Margaret Hayes. As she watched the situation play out, she realized that speaking up against Bob's manipulation had made this moment possible. Perhaps Bailey gave us all a lesson in bravery, as she discreetly told Olivia. Demonstrated to us that it is always worth the risk to speak up for what is right. The governor's office had already declared a thorough analysis of the legal system in context of the case. Bailey's remarkable contribution to revealing the faithful dog's corruption had sparked conversations about putting new precautions and oversight procedures in place. In addition to saving one individual, Dr. Carter helped bring forth measures that would safeguard many more. That a number of advocacy organizations were interested in the case and wished to create a program in Bailey's honor. The legacy of the elderly golden retriever would concentrate on examining convictions when evidence may have been altered. Bailey's continued pursuit of justice long after his own mission was finished. When the veterinarian visited for a last examination before leaving, the dog was completely healed from the poisoning attempt. The veterinarian was astounded by Bailey's tenacity and resolve, danced around James, pointing out that purpose and love may be very effective remedies for the jail staff. Members gathered to say goodbye to Bailey, the incredible dog who had permanently transformed their institution. He was more than simply a pet. He represented steadfast devotion and the victory of truth over corruption. Reminded everyone that justice may still prevail, even if it was occasionally delayed. Olivia planned a modest ceremony to thank Bailey and Margaret for their contributions to revealing the truth. A delegate from the governor's office delivered a special commendation, acknowledging the exceptional collaboration between a loyal canine and those who had assisted him in disclosing the truth. As James and Bailey got ready to leave, Dr. Carter thought back on the amazing journey that had led them to this point after leaving Blackwood behind. Reflected on the many lives that had been impacted and transformed by a single dog's will to reveal the truth, and how the media crews documented Bailey's tale would continue to motivate others. Together, James and Bailey left the prison gates, their silhouettes blending with the morning light behind them. After its sinister past of corruption was made public, Blackwood State Penitentiary emerged as a transformed establishment. Cycle of accountability that started in the weeks after Bailey's heartwarming tale went viral across the nation. The aging golden retriever retired to a peaceful life after touching hearts and inspiring change with James, but his influence persisted throughout the legal system, causing additional injustices and reopened cases. Dr. Carter had a unique photo on display because one devoted canine had refused to let the truth stay hidden. On their final day at Blackwood, Bailey was sitting proudly next to James at her desk, serving as a reminder that occasionally the strongest defenders of justice could take unexpected forms, and love and loyalty could triumph over even the most meticulously crafted lies. The core of Bailey's remarkable journey turned into a beacon of hope for others. His experience demonstrated that truth, no matter how deeply buried, could not be silenced, as demonstrated by others fighting against injustice. Forever, dear listeners, when someone, even a loyal dog, refuses to give up. Dr. Perlman, the baseball coach, says, "You have been as moved by Bailey's incredible journey as we have been by this tale of unwavering commitment." And the triumph of truth serves as a reminder that justice can triumph in the most surprising ways. For more motivational tales like Bailey's, see our unique playlist of remarkable tales by clicking the link on the left. Of dedication and tenacity. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel if you want to show your support. Education-related video content is available at education.just. Additional material that honors the extraordinary ties that bind people to their devoted pals. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below on how Bailey's story has affected you. Keep in mind that there are new tales to come to be published. We hope you have enjoyed this previous story and that the world will be better for it. Hope, bravery, and the remarkable force of unconditional love.